Hey guys, tonight we're doing something a little different. Forget sprawling battlefields and dramatic political assassinations for a moment. Tonight we're diving into the surprisingly intricate and, dare I say, oddly cozy topic of Roman emperors who basically treated entire cities like their own personal monopoly properties. Imagine strolling through ancient Ostia, the bustling port of Rome, and realizing, yep, this whole place, owned by the guy with the laurel wreath. It's the kind of historical flex that makes modern-day real estate tycoons look like they're playing with pocket change. You might be thinking, wow, that sounds intense. And you'd be right. Living under the thumb of an emperor who could, in theory, decide what colour your house should be probably wouldn't make for a stress-free existence. You probably won't survive this level of historical detail without a yawn or two, though, so consider that a win. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're settling in, drop a comment below telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you right now. It always blows my mind to think of you all winding down in different corners of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story begins not with the bang of an empire being forged, but with the slower, almost imperceptible creep of land ownership. Think of it like a tide, gradually rising and swallowing the shoreline. In the late Roman Republic, the traditional ideal of the small independent farmer was slowly eroding. Decades of relentless warfare, both foreign and civil, had a profound impact on the Italian landscape. Many smallholders, often citizen soldiers who had been away fighting for years, returned to find their farms neglected, their livelihoods gone. Some had even been outright dispossessed, their land absorbed by wealthier neighbours or powerful political figures. These were turbulent times, marked by social unrest and the rise of ambitious individuals eager to consolidate their power. Land, then as now, was a key component of wealth and influence. The more land you controlled, the more resources you had at your disposal, the more people were indebted to you, either directly as tenants or indirectly as beneficiaries of your largesse. This wasn't yet about emperors owning entire cities, but it was the fertile ground from which that practice would eventually sprout. Consider the vast tracts of land acquired through conquest. As the Roman Republic expanded its dominion across Italy and beyond, enormous swathes of territory fell under Roman control. While some of this land was allocated to Roman citizens as colonies or given to veterans as a reward for their service, a significant portion ended up in the hands of the state, the ager publicus, or public land. However, the management and eventual ownership of this public land often became a source of contention and opportunity for the wealthy and well-connected. Powerful senators and influential families found ways to lease, occupy, and even effectively privatize large chunks of this public land, sometimes through legal loopholes, sometimes through sheer force of influence. Think of someone like a particularly shrewd real estate developer in our own time, always on the lookout for undervalued property or ways to exploit zoning laws. Now, amplify that by the power and prestige of a Roman senator, and you start to get a picture of how these vast private estates known as latifundia began to take shape. These weren't necessarily cities yet, but they were sprawling agricultural enterprises, often encompassing entire villages and supporting a significant population of labourers, many of whom were slaves acquired through Rome's constant wars. This concentration of land ownership had significant social consequences. It contributed to the decline of the independent small farmer, creating a larger class of landless poor who often flocked to the cities, particularly Rome, seeking opportunities that were increasingly scarce. This in turn fueled social tensions and provided fertile ground for populist leaders who promised land reform. One mainstream historical fact that emerges from this period is the Gracchi brothers' attempts at land reform in the late 2nd century BCE. Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus recognized the dangers of this growing inequality and proposed laws to redistribute some of the public land to the poor. Their efforts, however, met with fierce opposition from the wealthy elite, who stood to lose their holdings, ultimately leading to the violent deaths of both brothers. This highlights just how deeply entrenched the issue of land ownership had become and how fiercely it was defended. Now, for a quirky tidbit. Did you know that some of these early large estates even had their own private armies? While technically illegal, powerful landowners often maintained large retinues of armed slaves or hired thugs to protect their property and enforce their will. This essentially created mini fiefdoms within the Republic, further blurring the lines between private property and public authority. Imagine trying to deliver a pizza to a gated community guarded by heavily armed gladiators. Good luck with that tip. Historians still argue whether the rise of the latifundia was the primary cause of the Republic's eventual decline, but it certainly played a significant role in the social and economic upheaval that characterised the period. The concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few undoubtedly contributed to the weakening of traditional Republican institutions and paved the way for the emergence of powerful individuals like Julius Caesar. Caesar himself was a master of accumulating both political power and vast personal wealth, including extensive land holdings. His military campaigns in Gaul not only brought him immense glory and a loyal army, but also provided him with the resources and influence to challenge the authority of the Senate. While not yet owning entire cities in the way later emperors would, Caesar's personal domains were staggering. He reportedly owned vast estates throughout Italy and beyond, employing armies of slaves and generating enormous income. Think of him as the ultimate landlord of his time, just on a slightly larger scale than your average property management company. The transition from republic to empire under Augustus further formalised and centralised the emperor's power, including his role as a major landowner. While Augustus was careful to maintain the facade of republican institutions, he effectively controlled vast resources and held immense personal wealth, much of it in the form of land. This included not only agricultural estates but also increasingly significant urban properties, so we're starting to see the seeds being sown. The erosion of small land ownership, the rise of massive private estates, the concentration of power in the hands of ambitious individuals, all these factors contribute to a climate where the idea of a single ruler owning entire urban centres would eventually become a reality. It wasn't a sudden land grab, but a gradual accumulation of power and property that unfolded over decades, setting the stage for the emperors to become the ultimate landlords of the Roman world. So we left off with the understanding that the groundwork for imperial ownership of cities was being laid during the late Roman Republic, with powerful individuals amassing increasingly vast tracts of land. And when we talk about powerful individuals during this era, one name undoubtedly rises above the rest. A name synonymous with ambition, military genius, and yes, extensive real estate: Gaius Julius Caesar. Now, Caesar wasn't just content with conquering Gaul or crossing the Rubicon. The man was also a serious player in the Roman property market. His personal domains were legendary, stretching across Italy and beyond, and they provide a fascinating glimpse into the scale of wealth and influence that a leading Roman figure could accumulate. Forget your average suburban garden. We're talking about landscapes that could probably fit several modern-day countries. One of the primary ways Caesar acquired his land was through inheritance and family connections. He came from a noble, albeit politically less prominent family, the gens Julia, and over time, through strategic marriages and the natural course of inheritance, the family's land holdings would have grown. Imagine the Roman equivalent of a family trust, except instead of a modest portfolio of stocks and bonds, it's rolling hills, vineyards, and olive groves. But inheritance alone wouldn't account for the sheer scale of Caesar's possessions. His political career and military successes played a far more significant role. As he rose through the ranks of Roman politics, holding various magistracies and eventually the consulship, he would have undoubtedly benefited from the patronage system and the opportunities for acquiring land that came with high office. Think of it as the ancient Roman version of lobbying, where political favours could translate into prime real estate. Of course, no discussion of Caesar's acquisitions would be complete without mentioning his military campaigns. His conquest of Gaul, a vast territory encompassing modern-day France, Belgium, and parts of Germany and Switzerland, not only brought immense wealth and prestige to Rome, but also undoubtedly provided Caesar himself with opportunities to acquire vast tracts of land, either directly or indirectly. While much of this land would have technically belonged to the Roman state, powerful generals like Caesar often wielded significant influence over its distribution and use. It's not too far-fetched to imagine him setting aside some prime Gallic real estate for his personal enjoyment or to reward his loyal veterans, further cementing his power and influence. Beyond these avenues, Caesar was also a shrewd and strategic buyer. He understood the value of land, both as a source of income and as a symbol of status. He likely invested heavily in property throughout Italy, acquiring agricultural estates that produced wine, grain, and olive oil, the staples of the Roman diet and valuable commodities for trade. Imagine him poring over property deeds, negotiating prices with Roman real estate agents, if such a thing existed, always looking for the next prime piece of land to add to his portfolio. The geographical spread of Caesar's land holdings was impressive. While he undoubtedly owned significant estates in the vicinity of Rome and across the Italian peninsula, his influence and likely his property extended into the provinces as well. Think of a global tycoon with properties scattered across continents. That was essentially Caesar on a smaller but still incredibly grand scale. The types of properties Caesar owned would have varied greatly. There were the large agricultural estates, the latifundia we mentioned earlier, which were the workhorses of the Roman economy, producing the food and resources needed to sustain the empire. These estates would have been complex operations, with numerous slaves and free labourers working the land, overseen by managers and administrators who reported back to Caesar or his representatives. Imagine the sheer logistical challenge of managing such vast agricultural enterprises. Then there were the villas, the luxurious country residences favoured by wealthy Romans. These weren't just simple farmhouses. They were often sprawling complexes with elaborate gardens, bathhouses, and stunning views, designed for relaxation, entertainment, and showcasing the owner's wealth and taste. Caesar, as one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in Rome, undoubtedly owned several such villas, offering him retreats from the hustle and bustle of Roman political life. Imagine him lounging by a mosaic-lined pool, discussing strategy with his generals while enjoying the finest wine produced on his own estates. It's even plausible that Caesar owned significant urban properties, perhaps even entire blocks of buildings in Rome itself, or in other major cities. While direct ownership of an entire city might have been a later development, controlling a substantial portion of the urban landscape would have been another way for Caesar to exert influence and generate income through rents. Think of him as a major landlord in the Roman metropolis. The economic significance of Caesar's land holdings cannot be overstated. These properties generated enormous wealth, providing him with the financial resources to fund his political ambitions, maintain his legions, and reward his supporters. The income from his estates would have been substantial, allowing him to live a life of unparalleled luxury and exert considerable financial leverage. It's like being the owner of a major corporation in our time, with the added benefit of having a personal army at your disposal, though hopefully modern CEOs don't have that perk. Now, for a mainstream historical fact, Caesar's will, famously read after his assassination, revealed the immense scale of his wealth and his plans for its distribution, including significant bequests to the Roman people and his loyal soldiers. This testament to his vast financial resources underscores the importance of land ownership in the Roman world and the extent to which Caesar had accumulated personal wealth. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. There's a historical anecdote, possibly apocryphal, that Caesar once quipped about the exorbitant price of a particular piece of land, saying that it was too small for a Roman proconsul. Whether true or not, it speaks to the grand scale of land ownership expected of someone of his stature. It's like a modern billionaire complaining that their new yacht is a bit cramped. Historians still debate the precise extent of Caesar's personal land holdings and the exact nature of his ownership in various territories. Records from this period are often incomplete or subject to interpretation, and it can be difficult to definitively separate his private property from the resources he controlled as a public official. However, there's no doubt that his personal domains were vast and played a crucial role in his rise to power and his enduring legacy. The management of such extensive properties would have required a sophisticated administrative structure. Caesar likely employed a network of freedmen, slaves, and trusted agents to oversee his various estates, collect rents, and manage agricultural production. Imagine the Roman equivalent of a chief operating officer, responsible for the smooth running of Caesar's vast property empire. So while Julius Caesar might not have legally owned entire cities in the same way that some of his imperial successors would, the sheer scale and scope of his personal land holdings laid the groundwork for that development. His accumulation of wealth and property demonstrated the immense power that could be derived from land ownership in the Roman world, and set a precedent for future leaders who would take this concept to an even more extreme level. He was the ultimate property mogul of his time, and his example undoubtedly influenced the emperors who came after him in their pursuit of owning not just vast estates, but entire urban centres. With Julius Caesar's assassination in 44 BCE, the Roman Republic teetered on the brink of collapse, eventually giving way to the Principate under his adopted son Octavian, who would later become known as Augustus. While Augustus was careful to maintain the appearance of republican institutions, in reality he consolidated immense power in his own hands, and this extended to the realm of land ownership. It was under Augustus that the somewhat ad hoc accumulation of land by powerful individuals like Caesar evolved into a more formal and centralized system, the imperial estates. Think of Augustus as the ultimate CEO, not just of Rome, but of a vast corporate entity where land was a primary asset. He didn't just inherit Caesar's private holdings, he strategically built upon them, creating a sprawling network of properties that were technically considered the emperor's private domain, distinct from the public lands of the Roman state. This distinction, while sometimes blurry in practice, was a crucial step in the development of imperial authority and the eventual ownership of entire cities by the emperors. One of the main sources of these imperial estates was, naturally, the inheritance from Julius Caesar. Augustus inherited a significant portion of Caesar's vast wealth, including his extensive land holdings. This provided a substantial foundation upon which to build his own network of properties. Imagine inheriting a chain of hotels. It gives you a pretty good head start in the hospitality industry. But inheritance was just the beginning. Augustus also acquired land through other means. The period following Caesar's death was marked by civil wars and political upheaval, and Augustus emerged victorious. This victory allowed him to confiscate the properties of his enemies and rivals, adding significant chunks of land to his personal holdings. Think of it as the ultimate spoils of war, where the victor gets not just the glory but also the prime real estate. Furthermore, Augustus skillfully leveraged the concept of state ownership. As the emperor, he wielded significant influence over the ager publicus, the public lands of Rome. While he couldn't simply declare all public land his own, he could often manage and control vast swathes of it, effectively incorporating them into his imperial estates. It's like the government leasing vast areas of land to a private corporation for development. Another important source of imperial states was through voluntary donations. Wealthy individuals, eager to curry favour with the emperor, or ensure the security of their own land holdings in a potentially unstable political climate, would often gift properties to Augustus. Think of it as the ultimate form of flattery, where the present is not a box of chocolates but an entire vineyard. The establishment and management of these imperial estates required a sophisticated administrative structure. Augustus developed a complex bureaucracy to oversee his private land holdings, with officials responsible for managing the various properties, collecting revenues, and ensuring their efficient operation. This network of imperial administrators became increasingly powerful and influential over time, directly serving the emperor's personal interests. Imagine a vast real estate management company, but instead of answering to shareholders, it answers directly to the most powerful person in the world. The purpose of these imperial estates was multifaceted. Firstly, they served as a major source of revenue for the emperor. The vast agricultural estates produced food and raw materials that could be sold or used to supply the city of Rome and the Roman army. The rents from urban properties and the resources extracted from mines and quarries on imperial land all contributed to the emperor's personal wealth. Think of it as a giant piggy bank that funded everything from public works to imperial extravagance. Secondly, the imperial estates provided Augustus with a powerful tool for patronage. He could reward his loyal supporters and allies by granting them access to land or positions within his vast administrative network. This created a system of dependence and loyalty that further strengthened his grip on power. It's like a powerful CEO giving stock options to their key employees, ensuring their continued dedication to the company. Thirdly, the ownership and control of these vast estates enhanced the emperor's authority and prestige. It visually demonstrated his immense wealth and power, reinforcing his position at the top of the Roman social hierarchy. Imagine the psychological impact of knowing that the person in charge not only controlled the army and the laws, but also owned vast swathes of the land you lived on. The geographical distribution of the imperial estates was extensive, spanning across the entire Roman Empire. Augustus held significant properties in Italy, of course, but also in the provinces, including fertile agricultural regions like Egypt and North Africa, which were crucial for supplying Rome with grain. Imagine an emperor with vacation homes in all the most desirable locations across the empire, from sunny Mediterranean villas to sprawling estates in the fertile river valleys. Now, for a mainstream historical fact, Augustus famously boasted in his Res Gestae Divi Augusti, a sort of personal autobiography, that he had restored the Republic, but in reality he had subtly but firmly established the foundations of the Roman Empire, including the crucial role of his personal wealth and property. This underscores the significance he placed on his imperial estates as a cornerstone of his power. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. There's evidence suggesting that some imperial estates even had their own private police forces and judicial systems, further blurring the lines between private ownership and public authority. Imagine getting a seating ticket issued by an emperor's personal estate manager. Historians still debate the exact legal status of the imperial estates under Augustus. Were they strictly the emperor's private property, or were they considered a kind of state asset held in the emperor's name? The distinction was often fluid and likely evolved over time, but the very existence of these vast, centrally managed holdings marked a significant departure from the land ownership patterns of the Republic. So, under Augustus, we see the transformation from a somewhat haphazard accumulation of land by powerful individuals to a more organised and formalised system of imperial estates. This network of properties, controlled directly by the emperor and managed by his own bureaucracy, provided a crucial source of revenue, patronage, and power. While Augustus might not have legally owned entire cities in the most literal sense, his extensive control over land and resources laid the groundwork for his successors to take that next logical step and exert direct ownership over significant urban centres within the empire. He built the infrastructure for imperial land ownership, setting the stage for the emperors to become the ultimate landlords of the Roman world. So, Augustus laid the foundation for the emperor as a major landowner, establishing the vast network of imperial estates. His successor Tiberius took this concept in a slightly different, perhaps more secluded direction. While he certainly inherited and likely expanded upon the traditional imperial estates across the empire, Tiberius is particularly remembered for his rather unique approach to imperial ownership, one that involved a specific, rather picturesque island, Capri. Think of Capri today, a stunning island in the Bay of Naples, known for its dramatic cliffs, luxurious villas, and the famous Blue Grotto. Now, picture that same island roughly 2,000 years ago and imagine it not just as a beautiful place, but as the private domain, essentially the personal kingdom of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. For the last decade of his reign, from 27 AD until his death in 37 AD, Tiberius largely governed the Roman Empire not from the bustling heart of Rome, but from this relatively small rocky outcrop. It's like the CEO of a global corporation deciding to run things from a remote tropical island, a power move with a definite flair for the dramatic. The relationship between Tiberius and Capri wasn't an overnight development. Even during Augustus's reign, Tiberius had spent time on the island. He clearly found something appealing about its secluded location and natural beauty. After becoming emperor, he gradually spent more and more time there, eventually making it his permanent residence for the latter part of his rule. How exactly did Tiberius come to effectively own Capri in this way? Well, as the emperor, he already held immense power and resources. It's likely that he either acquired existing villas and properties on the island, or simply commissioned the construction of new ones to his liking. Given his imperial authority, any pre-existing private ownership would have likely been secondary to his wishes. Imagine trying to argue with the emperor about property lines, not a conversation most people would have relished. Tiberius proceeded to transform parts of Capri into an imperial playground, building a series of magnificent villas across the island. The most famous of these was the Villa Jovis, a sprawling complex perched on the eastern cliffs, offering breathtaking panoramic views of the Bay of Naples. This wasn't just a single house. It was more like a self-contained imperial compound, complete with gardens, baths, audience halls, and even its own water supply. Imagine living in a house so big you could get lost trying to find the bathroom in the middle of the night. But Tiberius's ownership of Capri went beyond simply building luxurious villas. He essentially exerted complete control over the island and its inhabitants. It became his personal sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of governing the vast Roman Empire and indulge his own interests, whatever they may have been. Think of it as the ultimate do not disturb sign, except the sign applied to pretty much the entire Roman world. This seclusion on Capri led to a flurry of rumours and legends about Tiberius's activities there. Ancient historians like Suetonius and Tacitus paint a rather lurid picture of his life on the island. filled with alleged debauchery, cruelty, and paranoia. Tales of lavish banquets, bizarre sexual practices, and the execution of anyone who displeased him became associated with his time on Capri. Imagine a historical soap opera, but with more togas and fewer commercial breaks. Now, it's important to remember that these historical accounts are often coloured by the political biases of the writers and may not represent the full truth. However, the very fact that such rumours circulated highlights the extraordinary power that Tiberius wielded and the sense of mystery and even fear that surrounded his self-imposed isolation on Capri. What exactly was the emperor doing up there on his island fortress? The Roman populace could only speculate. One mainstream historical fact that emerges from Tiberius's time on Capri is the sheer duration of his absence from Rome. For a decade, the emperor effectively ruled the empire remotely, sending and receiving messages, making decisions from his island retreat. This was a significant departure from the traditional image of the emperor residing in the capital and actively engaging in public life. It demonstrated the extent to which the imperial authority had become centralized in the person of the emperor, regardless of his physical location. It's like the modern concept of remote work taken to an extreme, where the office is an entire island and the work is running a superpower. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. According to some accounts, Tiberius even trained special messengers to navigate the treacherous cliffs of Capri to deliver and receive his correspondence. Imagine a team of highly skilled rock climbers doubling as the Imperial Postal Service. Talk about dedication to the job. Historians still argue whether Tiberius's retreat to Capri was motivated by a desire for privacy and contemplation, as some suggest, or by something darker, such as paranoia or a desire to indulge in vice. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. Governing a vast empire was undoubtedly a stressful job, and the allure of escaping to a beautiful and secluded island would have been strong. However, the more sensational accounts of his activities on Capri have certainly captured the popular imagination over the centuries. The extent to which Tiberius truly owned the people living on Capri is also a matter of interpretation. While he didn't necessarily own them in the sense of chattel slavery, although there would have been slaves on the island, his imperial authority would have given him immense power over their lives and property. If the emperor decided he wanted a particular piece of land for a new villa, it's unlikely anyone would have dared to object. In that sense, the island and its resources were very much under his control. Capri under Tiberius became a symbol of exclusive imperial power. It represented the emperor's ability to detach himself from the rest of the world, to create his own private realm where he could live according to his own rules. It also served as a reminder of the emperor's absolute authority. Even in his absence from Rome, his power extended to every corner of the empire. Imagine the Roman senators having to wait for the emperor's decrees to arrive by boat from his island retreat. It certainly shifted the dynamics of power. The legacy of Tiberius's time on Capri continues to fascinate. The ruins of his villas still stand today, offering a tangible link to this period of Roman history. The stories and legends associated with his island retreat have been retold for centuries, contributing to the complex and often contradictory image of this enigmatic emperor. So while the ownership wasn't of an entire bustling metropolis in the traditional sense, Tiberius's relationship with Capri provides a fascinating early example of an emperor treating a significant geographical location as his own private domain. He exerted near absolute control over the island, transforming it into his personal sanctuary and effectively governing the empire from its rocky shores. It was a unique and perhaps eccentric approach to imperial power, but it certainly underscores the growing sense of the emperor as someone who could, quite literally, own an entire island. This sets the stage for our next exploration into emperors who extended this sense of ownership to even larger, more complex entities, entire cities. We've seen how Tiberius carved out his own private domain on the island of Capri, exercising near total control over a significant geographical location. Now, we turn our attention back to the heart of the Roman Empire, the bustling metropolis of Rome itself, and a particular emperor whose building projects took the concept of imperial ownership to a whole new level of audacity and extravagance: Nero. And his most infamous creation in this regard was undoubtedly the Domus Aurea, or the Golden House. Think of Rome in the mid-1st century AD, a sprawling, vibrant city, the centre of a vast empire teeming with life, noise, and a constant hum of activity. Then imagine a devastating catastrophe striking at its very core. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. This fire raged for days, consuming large swathes of the city, leaving behind a landscape of smouldering ruins and untold human suffering. It was a tragedy of immense proportions, but from the ashes of this disaster rose an even more audacious project conceived and driven by the Emperor Nero. He seized the opportunity presented by the fire to embark on a massive construction program, and the centerpiece of this endeavor was the Domus Aurea. This wasn't just a new imperial palace, it was an unprecedentedly vast and opulent complex that effectively swallowed a significant portion of the city centre. Imagine a modern-day city being devastated by a major event, and instead of simply rebuilding, the leader decides to construct a personal residence so enormous and lavish that it occupies a substantial chunk of the downtown area, complete with artificial lakes, forests, and even a colossal statue of himself. That gives you a sense of the scale and ambition of Nero's Golden House. The sheer size of the Domus Aurea was staggering. It reportedly covered an area of around 100 to 300 acres. Estimates vary, but either way, we're talking about a space equivalent to a significant park or even a small town within the city walls. This land had previously been occupied by private residences, public buildings, and sacred sites, all of which were swept away to make room for Nero's vision. Imagine having your house burned down only to find out the emperor was planning to build a pleasure palace on the site. Talk about a rough landlord. The opulence of the Golden House was equally mind-boggling. According to ancient accounts, the walls were adorned with shimmering gold leaf, precious jewels, and intricate mosaics. The ceilings were so high that they seemed to touch the sky, and some even had mechanisms to shower guests with flowers and perfume. One of the most famous features was a massive rotating dining room that was said to mimic the movement of the stars. Imagine hosting a dinner party where the room itself gently revolves around you. Definitely a conversation starter. The complex also included vast gardens, vineyards, pastures, and even an artificial lake that was large enough to accommodate ships. And at the entrance stood a colossal bronze statue of Nero himself, said to be over 100 feet tall. It was a monument to imperial power and personal vanity on an unprecedented scale. Now, how did Nero manage to acquire the land for this colossal project? After the fire, he likely used his imperial authority to claim the devastated areas as public land, which he then repurposed for his own building plans. While he may have provided some compensation to displaced residents, the sheer scale of the acquisition suggests a significant exercise of imperial power that would have likely been met with resentment by at least some segments of the population. Imagine the legal battles today if a leader tried to seize such a large area of a major city for their personal use. It would be a constitutional crisis. The construction of the Domus Aurea was hugely controversial. While Nero undoubtedly intended it as a symbol of Rome's rebirth and imperial grandeur, many saw it as an extravagant and selfish indulgence, especially in the wake of such a devastating fire that had left many citizens homeless and destitute. Rumours circulated that Nero himself had started the fire, a claim that historians still debate, in order to clear the way for his building project. Whether true or not, the association of the fire with the subsequent construction of the Golden House undoubtedly fueled public anger. One mainstream historical fact related to the Domus Aurea is that after Nero's death, his successors largely distanced themselves from the project due to its unpopularity and the negative associations with Nero's reign. Parts of the Golden House were dismantled or buried, and the land was eventually used for public buildings, including the Baths of Titus and the Colosseum, which was built on the site of the artificial lake. This act of reclaiming the land for the public good stands in stark contrast to Nero's personal appropriation of it. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Pliny the Elder, a contemporary of Nero, reportedly described the Golden House with a mix of awe and disapproval, remarking that it was so vast that it was as if Nero had declared, "Let us now extend our villas over cities." This quote perfectly encapsulates the unprecedented scale of Nero's project and its encroachment upon the urban fabric of Rome. Historians still argue about the precise motivations behind Nero's construction of the Domus Aurea. Was it purely an act of narcissistic excess? Was it an attempt to create a new vision for Rome after the fire? Or was it a strategic move to consolidate his power and project an image of unparalleled imperial authority? The answer likely involves a combination of these factors. The extent to which Nero's ownership of the Domus Aurea meant he essentially owned a core part of Rome is undeniable. By building such a massive private complex in the heart of the city, he effectively transformed a significant portion of the urban landscape into his personal domain. Imagine a modern-day president or prime minister building a private residence that encompassed several major city blocks, complete with its own amenities and restricted access. It would fundamentally alter the relationship between the ruler and the city. While Nero didn't legally own all of Rome, his control over such a substantial area, especially in the city centre, gave him an unprecedented level of influence over the capital. It visually and physically manifested the emperor's power in a way that previous rulers had not attempted. The sheer scale of the Golden House must have been a constant reminder to the citizens of Rome of the emperor's immense wealth and authority. After Nero's downfall and death, the public's animosity towards him and his Golden House led to its partial destruction and the repurposing of the land for public use. This can be seen as a symbolic reclaiming of the city from the grasp of an emperor who had seemed to equate the imperial capital with his own private property. However, Nero's audacious project left a lasting impact on the city of Rome and on the concept of imperial ownership. It demonstrated the potential for an emperor to directly control and reshape the urban environment on a massive scale. While his successors might have condemned his extravagance, the precedent of emperors exerting significant control over land within the city had been set. So while Tiberius retreated to his island, Nero boldly expanded his personal domain into the very heart of Rome. The Golden House, in its sheer size and opulence, represented an unprecedented act of imperial appropriation of urban space. It was a tangible manifestation of the emperor's power, effectively transforming a significant portion of the capital into his own private kingdom. This sets the stage for us to explore how later emperors continued and adapted this trend of blurring the lines between public and private ownership within the cities of the Roman Empire. So we've just witnessed Nero's audacious move to essentially plant his personal palace, the sprawling Domus Aurea, right in the middle of Rome, a stark example of imperial ambition shaping urban space. But as is often the case in history, the pendulum swings. Following the tumultuous reign of Nero and a brief period of civil war, a new dynasty emerged. The Flavians, with Vespasian taking the imperial purple in 69 AD. Their approach to governance, and indeed to land ownership, was notably different from that of their flamboyant predecessor. Think of the Flavians as the pragmatic clean-up crew after a particularly wild party. Nero's reign had been marked by extravagance, perceived tyranny, and ultimately his violent demise. The Flavians, on the other hand, emphasised stability, order, and a return to more traditional Roman values, at least in their public image. This shift in approach also manifested in their policies regarding land, particularly in how they dealt with the legacy of Nero's vast Golden House. One of the most immediate and symbolic actions of the Flavians was to dismantle much of the Domus Aurea and repurpose the land for public benefit. Imagine the collective sigh of relief from the Roman populace as they saw the physical manifestation of Nero's ego being taken down brick by golden brick. Vespasian in particular made a point of reversing some of Nero's more unpopular decisions, and reclaiming land that had been essentially annexed for the emperor's personal pleasure was a key part of this strategy. The site of the artificial lake within the Domus Aurea complex, for instance, was chosen as the location for the Flavian amphitheatre, which we now know as the Colosseum. This massive public entertainment venue was a direct contrast to the private indulgence of Nero's palace. Think about the symbolism. Where Nero had a lake for his personal enjoyment, Vespasian built an arena for the entertainment of the Roman people. It was a powerful statement about the priorities of the new regime. Similarly, other parts of the Domus Aurea's sprawling grounds were used for the construction of public baths, the Baths of Titus, and other civic structures. This act of reclaiming land for the public good was a tangible way for the Flavians to demonstrate their commitment to the welfare of the Roman people, and to distance themselves from the perceived excesses of Nero. It was like taking a private golf course and turning it into a public park. Now, it's not to say that the Flavian emperors didn't own significant amounts of land themselves. Like their predecessors, they controlled vast imperial estates across the empire, which were crucial for revenue generation and maintaining their power. However, their approach to land within the city of Rome, particularly the land formerly occupied by the Domus Aurea, suggests a greater emphasis on public benefit, or at least the appearance of it. One mainstream historical fact that underscores this shift is Vespasian's famous quote upon the inauguration of the Colosseum: "What Nero thought private, Vespasian made public." This succinctly captures the Flavian attitude towards reclaiming land that had been essentially monopolized by the previous emperor. It was a clear message to the Roman people that things were changing. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. It's said that the name Colosseum actually derives from the Colossus of Nero, the giant statue of Nero that stood near the amphitheatre. While the statue itself remained for a time, the amphitheatre built on the site of Nero's lake became the dominant landmark, eventually lending its name to the area, effectively overshadowing the memory of the previous emperor's extravagance. It's like a more popular restaurant opening up next door and stealing all the customers, and even the name association, from the old one. Historians still debate the precise extent to which the Flavians' land policies represented a genuine commitment to public interest versus a strategic move to consolidate their own power and legitimacy after a period of turmoil. It's likely a combination of both. By reversing some of Nero's unpopular land grabs and dedicating the land to public use, the Flavians would have undoubtedly gained favour with the Roman populace and bolstered their own standing. While the Flavians are primarily remembered for their large-scale public works like the Colosseum, their approach to land ownership also had implications beyond the city of Rome. As emperors who came to power after a period of instability, they likely focused on ensuring the efficient management and revenue generation of the imperial estates across the empire. This might have involved some reorganisation or adjustments to how these lands were administered, although perhaps not as dramatic as the changes within Rome itself. It's also worth considering the fate of individuals who might have been displaced by Nero's construction of the Domus Aurea. While the Flavians reclaimed the land for public use, it's not entirely clear whether they made significant efforts to compensate or resettle those who had lost their homes. This is one of those areas where the historical record is somewhat less detailed, and historians often have to piece together the likely scenarios based on broader patterns of Roman governance. The Flavian dynasty, despite its relatively short duration, played a crucial role in shaping the urban landscape of Rome and in redefining the relationship between the emperor and the city. By actively reclaiming land that had been used for Nero's private pleasures and dedicating it to public benefit, they set a precedent for future emperors, even if that precedent wasn't always consistently followed. So while the trend of emperors owning vast tracts of land continued under the Flavians, their actions regarding the land within Rome, particularly the former site of the Domus Aurea, demonstrate a notable shift in emphasis. They understood the political value of appearing to prioritise the public good, and reclaiming land for the construction of iconic structures like the Colosseum served both a practical and a symbolic purpose. It showed that the excesses of Nero's private ownership were being replaced by a more public-oriented approach, at least in the heart of the empire. This sets the stage for us to explore how subsequent emperors navigated the complexities of land ownership and the ever-present tension between imperial power and public interest. We've seen the Flavians making a point of reclaiming some of Nero's extravagant land for the public good, but the allure of creating one's own private world, essentially a mini-kingdom under imperial control, remained a potent one for Roman emperors, and perhaps no emperor exemplifies this desire more vividly than Hadrian, who reigned from 117 to 138 AD. While Nero built his grand vision in the heart of Rome, Hadrian took a different approach, creating an entire sprawling complex outside the city at Tiber, modern-day Tivoli. Hadrian's Villa. Think of Hadrian's Villa as the ultimate imperial getaway, a place where the emperor could not only relax and escape the pressures of Rome, but also indulge his wide-ranging intellectual and artistic interests on a truly monumental scale. It wasn't just a villa in the traditional sense. It was more like a self-contained city in miniature, a testament to the emperor's power, wealth, and personal tastes. Imagine a modern billionaire building a private resort so vast it has its own replicas of world landmarks. That's the kind of ambition we're talking about here. The sheer size of Hadrian's Villa is astounding. It covered an area of over 120 hectares, around 300 acres, making it larger than most Roman towns. Within this vast space, Hadrian constructed an incredible array of buildings, including multiple residences, libraries, theatres, temples, bath complexes, gardens, and even artificial canals and grottos. It was a microcosm of the Roman world, all contained within the walls of a private estate. Walking through the ruins of Hadrian's villa today, you can still get a sense of its grandeur and complexity. You might find yourself wandering through the remains of the Maritime Theatre, a circular island with a small villa on it surrounded by a moat. This was likely Hadrian's private sanctuary within the larger complex, a place where he could retreat for contemplation. Imagine having your own private island just a short stroll from your main living quarters. Then there's the Canopus, a long pool flanked by columns and statues, designed to evoke the canal that led to the Egyptian city of Canopus, which Hadrian had visited. It's a testament to his love of travel and his desire to incorporate elements of the different cultures he encountered throughout the Roman Empire into his own private world. Think of it as a historical scrapbook built in stone and water. The villa also featured several bath complexes, reflecting the Roman obsession with hygiene and relaxation. The great baths and the small baths offered different types of bathing experiences, complete with tepidariums, caldariums and frigidariums, the Roman equivalent of a modern spa just on a much grander scale. Imagine unwinding after a long day of ruling the empire with a soak in a heated pool surrounded by marble and mosaics. Hadrian's villa even had its own libraries, both Greek and Latin, indicating the emperor's intellectual pursuits. He was known for his love of literature, philosophy and the arts, and his villa provided a space where he could immerse himself in these interests. Imagine having your own private library stocked with the wisdom of the ancient world, just a few steps from your bedroom. The design of Hadrian's villa was highly eclectic, reflecting the emperor's travels and his fascination with different architectural styles. You can see influences from Greece, Egypt and other parts of the Roman Empire in the various structures throughout the complex. It's like a world's fair of ancient architecture, all soberano under one very large roof. Now, to what extent did Hadrian effectively own this complex and the people within it? As the emperor, he certainly held absolute legal ownership of the land and everything built upon it. But beyond that, the villa functioned as a self-contained urban centre, housing not only the emperor and his immediate household, but also a large number of staff, including administrators, servants, guards, and artisans who were responsible for maintaining the vast estate and catering to Hadrian's needs. These individuals, while perhaps not slaves in the traditional sense, would have been entirely dependent on the emperor for their livelihoods and would have been subject to his direct authority. In that sense, Hadrian's villa operated as a microcosm of the Roman Empire itself, with the emperor at the top of the social and power hierarchy. Imagine living and working in a place entirely owned and controlled by one person. It certainly gives a new meaning to the term company town. One mainstream historical fact about Hadrian's villa is that it continued to be used by subsequent emperors after Hadrian's death, although perhaps not with the same level of personal investment. It remained an important imperial residence and a symbol of Roman grandeur for centuries. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. It's been suggested that some of the structures within Hadrian's villa, like the Maritime Theatre, were designed specifically for the emperor's personal use and contemplation, perhaps even to indulge in his hobbies without the constraints of imperial courtly life. Maybe he even practiced his speeches to an audience of statues. Who knows? Historians still debate the precise purpose and function of every building within Hadrian's villa. Its complexity and the lack of detailed contemporary accounts mean that many interpretations are based on archaeological evidence and educated guesswork. For example, the use of some of the more unusual structures, like the so-called Philosopher's Hall, remains a subject of scholarly discussion. The creation of Hadrian's villa highlights the immense resources and power that Roman emperors could command. To build such a vast and elaborate complex required a massive investment of time, labour and materials, all directed by the emperor's personal vision. It serves as a tangible reminder of the scale of imperial ambition and the ability of Roman rulers to shape their environment according to their will. Furthermore, Hadrian's villa underscores the blurring lines between public and private spheres in the Roman Empire. While the emperor held immense personal wealth and property, his position was also a public one, with responsibilities to the state and the Roman people. However, complexes like Hadrian's villa demonstrate how emperors could use their resources to create essentially private realms that operated outside the direct purview of traditional Roman administration. So while Nero built his empire within a city, Hadrian built a city within his empire. His villa at Tibur wasn't just a residence. It was a sprawling, self-contained urban centre, that reflected the emperor's personal tastes and served as a powerful symbol of his authority. It exemplifies the Roman emperor not just as a ruler, but also as a powerful landowner who could create and control entire landscapes and the people living within them. This sets the stage for us to examine how this trend of imperial ownership continued and evolved under subsequent emperors, further solidifying the emperor's role as a dominant force in the urban fabric of the Roman world. We've just explored Hadrian's incredible private world at his villa in Tivoli, a testament to the personal power and resources of the Roman emperor. Now, we turn our attention to the period that followed, often considered a golden age of the Roman Empire, the era of the Antonine emperors. From Nerva to Marcus Aurelius, roughly 96 to 180 AD, this period was largely characterized by peace, prosperity, and effective governance. And it's worth considering how the established network of imperial estates played a role in fostering this relative stability. Think of the Antonine era as a period of sustained economic growth and social calm in the Roman world. While there were certainly challenges and regional conflicts, compared to the tumultuous periods that came before and after, this era stands out for its relative tranquility. And a key factor underpinning this stability was undoubtedly the robust economic health of the empire, to which the well-oiled machine of the imperial estates likely contributed significantly. By this point, the system of imperial estates, which had been gradually developed by Augustus and his successors, was a mature and sophisticated operation. These vast land holdings, spread across the empire, were no longer just personal properties of the emperor. They had become an integral part of the imperial administration, generating substantial revenue that could be used to fund the various needs of the state. Imagine the imperial estates as a massive corporation with diverse holdings in agriculture, mining, and even urban real estate across a vast territory. The profits from these ventures flowed directly into the imperial treasury, providing a steady stream of income that the emperors could then allocate to different priorities. One of the primary ways this revenue contributed to stability was through funding the Roman army. A well-maintained and well-compensated army was crucial for maintaining peace within the empire's borders and defending against external threats. The imperial estates provided a reliable source of funds to pay the legions, build fortifications, and supply their needs, thus ensuring their loyalty and effectiveness. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a robust defense budget, underwritten by the emperor's extensive land holdings. Furthermore, the revenue from imperial estates allowed the Antonine emperors to invest in significant public works projects. Aqueducts, roads, bridges, and public baths were constructed throughout the empire, improving the lives of citizens and fostering a sense of Roman identity and belonging. These projects also provided employment, further contributing to economic stability and social harmony. Imagine the positive impact of reliable infrastructure on trade and communication across the vast empire, all partly funded by the emperor's properties. The imperial estates also provided opportunities for patronage. The emperors could reward loyal officials and supporters with grants of land or positions within the vast administrative structure that managed these estates. This system of patronage helped to cultivate loyalty and build a network of individuals invested in the success of the imperial regime. It's like a company offering attractive benefits and opportunities for advancement to its employees, fostering a sense of commitment and reducing turnover. One mainstream historical fact about the Antonine era is the long period of sustained peace known as the Pax Romana, which reached its peak during this time. While not solely attributable to the imperial estates, the economic prosperity and stability that they helped to underpin were certainly contributing factors to this era of relative peace. A well-fed and prosperous populace is generally less likely to revolt than one facing economic hardship. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Some historians believe that the efficient management of the imperial estates during this period might have even contributed to advancements in agricultural techniques and resource management. The sheer scale of these operations could have allowed for experimentation and the implementation of best practices that then diffused more widely across the empire. Imagine the imperial estate managers holding conferences to discuss the latest innovations in Roman farming. Historians still debate the precise extent to which the Antonine emperors expanded or significantly altered the management of the imperial estates compared to their predecessors. It seems likely that they largely maintained and refined the existing systems, focusing on efficiency and ensuring a steady flow of revenue. The emphasis during this period was on consolidation and effective administration, rather than dramatic expansion of imperial land ownership, the Antonine emperors were generally known for their competence and their commitment to good governance. This likely extended to the management of the imperial estates. Efficient administration and careful resource allocation would have been crucial for maximising the revenue generated by these properties and ensuring that it was used effectively to meet the needs of the empire. Think of a well-run business where attention to detail and sound management practices lead to consistent profitability. It's also worth noting that some of the Antonine emperors, like Marcus Aurelius, were known for their philosophical inclinations. While this might seem unrelated to land ownership, it could be argued that their emphasis on duty, reason, and good governance extended to how they viewed and managed the resources of the empire, including the imperial estates. A philosopher king might be more inclined to see these lands as responsibilities to be managed for the benefit of all, rather than simply as a source of personal enrichment. The relative stability of the Antonine era also meant less disruption to agricultural production and trade on the imperial estates. Periods of civil war or unrest could lead to the neglect of land and the disruption of supply chains, negatively impacting revenue. The Pax Romana provided a stable environment for the imperial estates to flourish and consistently generate income. So while the ownership of entire cities might not have been the primary focus of the Antonine emperors, the vast network of imperial estates that they inherited and managed played a crucial role in the stability and prosperity of their reign. These estates provided the economic backbone that supported the army, funded public works, and facilitated patronage, all of which contributed to the relative peace of the Pax Romana. The efficient management and strategic use of the resources derived from these imperial lands were undoubtedly important factors in maintaining the golden age of the Roman Empire. This sets the stage for us to explore how this period of relative stability eventually gave way to new challenges, and how imperial land ownership continued to evolve in response. We've just seen how the Antonine emperors presided over a period of relative stability, partly underpinned by the effective management and utilisation of the vast imperial estates. But as history often reminds us, periods of calm are rarely permanent. The reign of Marcus Aurelius' son, Commodus, 180 to 192 AD, marked a significant shift in the dynamics of imperial power, and this extended to how the imperial states were treated, in a word, more erratically. Think of the Antonine era as a well-tuned orchestra playing a harmonious symphony. Now imagine Commodus stepping in as the conductor, but he's more interested in playing his own solo on a kazoo, occasionally banging on the drums with his feet and generally disrupting the established rhythm. His reign is often seen as a turning point, a move away from the more thoughtful and responsible governance of his predecessors towards something more personal, self-indulgent, and at times downright bizarre. While the Antonine emperors generally seem to view the imperial estates as resources to be managed for the benefit of the empire, at least in part, Commodus's approach appears to have been more focused on how these properties could serve his personal whims and extravagant tastes. The lines between public duty and private gratification became increasingly blurred under his rule. One of the defining characteristics of Commodus's reign was his obsession with gladiatorial combat and other forms of public spectacle. He famously participated in gladiatorial games himself, much to the shock and disapproval of the Roman elite. Imagine the emperor of the most powerful empire in the world dressing up as a gladiator and stepping into the arena. It certainly wasn't your typical day at the office for a Roman senator. This focus on personal entertainment and the need to fund his lavish spectacles likely had an impact on how the imperial estates were managed. Resources that might have previously been allocated to public works or the maintenance of infrastructure could have been diverted to support Commodus's personal passions. Think of it as the CEO of a major corporation suddenly deciding to spend all the company's profits on their personal hobby. We don't have extensive detailed accounts of Commodus directly managing specific imperial estates, but his overall approach to governance suggests a less hands-on and perhaps more exploitative attitude towards these resources. He relied heavily on advisors, some of whom were notoriously corrupt, and it's plausible that the efficient administration of the imperial lands suffered as a result. Imagine a large estate being overseen by a manager who is more interested in lining their own pockets than in maximising productivity for the owner. There are accounts of Commodus bestowing lavish gifts and estates on his favourites, sometimes seemingly on a whim. While emperors had always used patronage, under Commodus, this might have become more arbitrary and less tied to genuine merit or service to the state. This kind of erratic distribution of imperial assets could have disrupted established administrative structures and led to inefficiencies. Think of a company where promotions and bonuses are given out based on personal favour rather than performance. It doesn't usually lead to a well-run organisation. One mainstream historical fact about Commodus is that his reign ended in assassination. A conspiracy involving members of his own household, including his mistress and the Praetorian prefect, brought his life and his erratic rule to an abrupt end. This violent conclusion underscores the instability and discontent that his actions had generated. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Commodus was so enamoured with his image as a gladiator that he even renamed Rome Colonia Commodiana, essentially declaring the capital city his personal colony. While this change was reversed after his death, it highlights the extent to which he viewed the empire, and by extension its key city, through the lens of his own ego and personal identity. It's like renaming your house the House of Awesome You. Historians still debate the extent to which Commodus's reign marked a complete break from the Antonine model of governance and the precise impact of his policies on the long-term stability of the empire. Some argue that he was simply a flawed individual who inherited a system that was strong enough to withstand his excesses for a time, while others see his rule as a clear turning point towards the more turbulent period of the 3rd century. It's plausible that the management of the imperial states during Commodus's reign became less systematic and more driven by immediate needs or personal desires. The focus might have shifted from long-term planning and efficient resource allocation to simply extracting as much wealth as possible to fund the emperor's extravagant lifestyle and his various public spectacles. Imagine the imperial state managers receiving increasingly bizarre and demanding requests from the imperial court. Commodus's erratic behaviour and his perceived detachment from the traditional duties of an emperor likely eroded some of the goodwill and stability that had characterised the Antonine period. His focus on personal glory and entertainment rather than on the welfare of the empire could have led to resentment among the elite and a sense of neglect among the broader population. This could have indirectly impacted the smooth functioning of the imperial administration, including the management of the estates. While we might not see explicit examples of Commodus directly owning entire new cities beyond his rechristening of Rome, his attitude towards the empire as a whole, and its resources including the imperial estates, certainly took on a more personal and arguably proprietary tone. The sense of the emperor as a responsible steward of the empire's assets seems to have diminished, replaced by a sense of the empire as something to be used and enjoyed for the emperor's own gratification. While the Antonine emperors generally oversaw a period of stability where the imperial estates contributed to the overall well-being of the empire, the reign of Commodus introduced a more unpredictable element. His self-indulgent nature and erratic behaviour likely impacted the management and utilisation of these vast resources, potentially diverting them towards his personal pleasures and signalling a shift away from the more responsible governance of his predecessors. This sets the stage for us to explore the even more turbulent period that followed Commodus's assassination, and how the concept of imperial ownership was further tested and transformed during the crisis of the 3rd century. We've just seen how the reign of Commodus marked a shift towards a more erratic and self-serving approach to imperial power and the management of imperial resources. Following his assassination, the Roman Empire plunged into a brief but bloody period of civil war, from which emerged a new emperor, Septimius Severus. His rule, beginning in 193 AD, was characterised by a strong military focus and a significant expansion of imperial power, which also had implications for imperial landholdings and potentially the ownership of cities. Think of the period after Commodus as the empire hitting a bit of a reset button, albeit a rather chaotic one involving multiple contenders for the throne. Septimius Severus, a general from North Africa, ultimately prevailed through military might, and his reign signalled a new era, one where the military played an increasingly dominant role in Roman politics. And with military success came territorial expansion, which, as you can imagine, meant more land coming under Roman control and often directly under the emperor's control. Severus engaged in several significant military campaigns throughout his reign. He fought successful wars in the east against the Parthian Empire, expanding Roman territory in Mesopotamia. He also campaigned in Britain, further consolidating Roman control over the island. These military victories not only brought glory and prestige to Rome, but also resulted in the acquisition of vast new tracts of land. Now, when the Roman Empire conquered new territories, the land within those territories often became Roman public land, the ager publicus. And as we've discussed before, the management and sometimes the outright ownership of this public land often fell under the purview of the emperor. It's not a huge leap to imagine that with significant new conquests under Septimius Severus, the amount of land directly controlled by the imperial administration, and thus effectively by the emperor, would have increased substantially. Think of it as the empire getting a massive real estate portfolio boost thanks to some successful military manoeuvres. Furthermore, in newly conquered territories, the Romans often established new cities or exerted greater control over existing urban centres. These cities served as administrative hubs, military strongholds, and centres of Roman culture and influence. It's quite possible that in some of these cases, particularly in regions where Roman control was less established, the emperor might have exerted a more direct form of ownership or control over these cities to ensure their loyalty and integration into the empire. Imagine the emperor as the ultimate developer and landlord in a brand new Roman colonial city. The motivations behind this expansion of imperial holdings were likely multifaceted. Firstly, control over land meant control over resources, both agricultural and mineral, which could be used to enrich the empire and fund its military and administrative expenses. Secondly, direct imperial ownership could streamline the administration of these territories and ensure that the benefits flowed directly to the imperial treasury. Thirdly, in strategic locations, especially newly conquered areas, direct imperial control over key cities could be vital for maintaining order and projecting Roman power. While we might not have explicit legal documents stating that Septimius Severus owned entire cities in the way we understand private property today, the reality of imperial power in newly conquered regions likely meant that the emperor's authority was paramount, and that urban centres within these areas were heavily reliant on and directly answerable to the imperial administration. In that sense, the distinction between public land managed by the emperor and land directly owned by the emperor might have become somewhat academic in practice. Imagine a company acquiring a smaller firm. The lines of ownership and control become very clear. One mainstream historical fact about Septimius Severus is that he significantly increased the power and size of the Roman army, making it a more central force in imperial administration. This military focus likely played a role in how newly acquired territories and their urban centres were managed, with a strong emphasis on military control and the establishment of loyal garrisons. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Septimius Severus was known for incorporating elements of Eastern cults into Roman religious practices. It's not entirely outlandish to think that in some of the newly acquired Eastern cities with their own strong religious traditions, the emperor might have taken a more direct role in civic affairs, perhaps even in the ownership or management of religious properties, as a way to foster integration and loyalty. Imagine the emperor becoming the chief patron of the local temple in a newly Romanized city. Historians still debate the precise legal and administrative arrangements for newly conquered territories under Septimius Severus, and the extent to which the emperor's personal ownership or control of cities within these regions differed from that in older, more established provinces. The historical records from this period can be fragmented, and it requires careful analysis of inscriptions, legal texts, and the accounts of contemporary writers to piece together the full picture. It's also worth considering the long-term impact of Severus's policies on the relationship between the emperor and the cities within the empire. By potentially increasing direct imperial control over urban centres, particularly in newly conquered areas, he might have further eroded the autonomy of these cities and strengthened the emperor's role as the ultimate authority and landowner within his vast domain. While the Antonine emperors focused on maintaining stability within existing borders, Septimius Severus was an emperor who actively expanded those borders. This expansion naturally brought with it new lands and new urban centres, and it seems likely that Severus took a more direct and assertive approach to managing these new acquisitions, further solidifying the emperor's position as a dominant landowner and potentially as a direct controller of cities within these regions. So while we might not have explicit evidence of Septimius Severus declaring "this city is now mine," in the same way a private citizen might buy a house, his military successes led to a significant increase in the amount of territory under Roman control, and it's highly probable that urban centres within these newly acquired regions came under a more direct form of imperial administration and influence. This represents a further step in the evolution of imperial power and the emperor's relationship with the cities of the empire, setting the stage for the even more dramatic transformations of the crisis of the 3rd century. We've just seen how Septimius Severus expanded Roman territory and likely consolidated imperial control over newly acquired lands, but the relative stability that followed his reign was not to last. The 3rd century AD is often referred to as the crisis of the 3rd century, a period of intense turmoil, political instability, and widespread chaos that profoundly impacted nearly every aspect of Roman life, including the emperor's ability to exert control over his vast landholdings and even entire cities. Think of the Roman Empire during the crisis of the 3rd century as a ship caught in a violent storm. Emperors rose and fell with alarming frequency, often through military coups. Civil wars erupted across the empire as different factions vied for power. Barbarian tribes pressed against the frontiers, and in some cases even breached them, leading to widespread devastation and disruption. It was a period where the very survival of the empire seemed to hang in the balance. In such an environment of constant upheaval, the centralized control that the emperors had previously exercised over the imperial estates would have been severely challenged. Imagine trying to manage a vast real estate portfolio when the government's collapsing around you, communication lines are disrupted, and different regional warlords are popping up and claiming ownership of everything within their reach. The rapid turnover of emperors, sometimes multiple emperors in a single year, meant that there was a lack of consistent leadership and a breakdown of established administrative processes. Each new emperor might have had their own priorities and their own supporters to reward, potentially leading to the confiscation and redistribution of imperial lands on a whim. Imagine the poor imperial state managers trying to figure out who their boss was from one month to the next. The constant civil wars that plagued this period would have also had a devastating impact on imperial land control. Armies loyal to different claimants would have marched across the countryside, requisitioning supplies, damaging infrastructure, and potentially seizing control of imperial estates to fund their campaigns. Imagine your vineyard being trampled by a legion of soldiers arguing about who the rightful emperor was. Furthermore, the pressure on the frontiers from barbarian invasions meant that large areas of the empire were under threat or even temporarily occupied by hostile forces. In such regions, the emperor's claim to ownership of land, including cities, would have been virtually meaningless. Local strongmen or invading chieftains might have taken control, effectively fragmenting imperial authority and land ownership. Imagine trying to collect rent from a city that has just been sacked by Goths. One mainstream historical fact of the crisis of the 3rd century is the sheer number of emperors who reigned during this period. In the span of roughly 50 years, there were over 20 recognised emperors and numerous other usurpers who briefly held power in different regions. This rapid succession highlights the intense political instability of the era. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. It's said that during this period some emperors reigned for only a few months, sometimes even weeks, before being overthrown and killed. You'd barely have time to unpack your bags in the imperial palace, let alone issue decrees about your vast landholdings. Talk about a short-term lease on power. Historians still debate the precise extent of the fragmentation of imperial land control during the crisis of the 3rd century. While the central authority of the emperor certainly weakened, the underlying administrative structures of the empire didn't completely disappear. It's likely that in some regions, particularly those far from the centres of conflict, the imperial estates continued to be managed and to generate revenue, albeit perhaps with less oversight from the central government. However, there's no doubt that the chaos of the period created opportunities for local elites and military commanders to assert their own authority and potentially encroach upon imperial lands. In regions where the central government was weak or preoccupied with other conflicts, powerful individuals might have effectively taken control of estates or even cities, either openly defying the emperor or simply operating with a high degree of autonomy. Imagine a local governor deciding that the emperor is too busy fighting someone else to notice if they start treating the imperial lands in their province as their own. The strain on imperial resources during this time of crisis would have also meant that the maintenance and upkeep of imperial estates might have been neglected. With so much focus on raising armies and fighting wars, there might have been less attention paid to the efficient management of agricultural production or the repair of infrastructure on imperial lands. This could have led to a decline in their productivity and profitability. The impact on urban centres would have been particularly significant. Many cities were fortified and played a crucial role in defence during the civil wars and invasions. Some might have remained loyal to the reigning emperor, while others might have thrown their support behind different claimants or even declared their independence for a time. The emperor's ownership or control over these cities would have been contingent on the shifting tides of the conflicts. Imagine a city changing hands multiple times as different armies marched through. It's also worth considering the rise of powerful regional rulers, like those who emerged in the Gallic Empire and the Palmyrene Empire, which briefly broke away from the central Roman authority during this period. These independent entities would have undoubtedly exerted control over the land and cities within their territories, effectively challenging the emperor's claim of ownership, so the crisis of the 3rd century was a period of significant upheaval that undoubtedly had a profound impact on the centralized control of imperial land. The constant political instability, civil wars and barbarian invasions created a climate where the emperor's authority was weakened, and regional powers could rise, leading to a fragmentation of imperial landholdings and challenges to the emperor's ownership of even major cities. This sets the stage for the eventual recovery and reorganization of the empire under later emperors, who would attempt to restore centralized control and address the challenges that had emerged during this tumultuous time. We've just navigated the turbulent waters of the crisis of the 3rd century, a period where the emperor's control over vast territories, including imperial estates, was severely tested. Out of this chaos emerged a figure who would fundamentally reshape the Roman Empire, Diocletian. His reign, beginning in 284 AD, marked a decisive break from the past and a determined effort to restore order and stability. A key innovation of his rule was the implementation of the Tetrarchy, a system of governance involving not 1 but 4 emperors, and this division of power had significant implications for the management and control of the empire's vast landholdings. Think of Diocletian as the ultimate corporate turnaround specialist. He inherited a company, the Roman Empire, that was on the brink of collapse, riddled with internal conflicts and external threats. His radical solution was to essentially break it up into more manageable units, each with its own leadership, in the hope of improving efficiency and accountability. The Tetrarchy, established in 293 AD, involved 2 senior emperors, known as Augusti, and 2 junior emperors, known as Caesars. Diocletian himself took the title of Augustus in the east, while his comrade Maximian became the Augustus in the west. Each Augustus then adopted a Caesar as their junior partner and designated successor, Galerius for Diocletian in the east, and Constantius Chlorus for Maximian in the west. This wasn't just a symbolic division of titles, it involved a real geographical partitioning of the empire. Each of the 4 emperors was assigned a specific region to govern and defend. Diocletian ruled the eastern provinces, including Thrace, Asia Minor and Egypt, from Nicomedia. Maximian controlled Italy and Africa from Milan. Galerius was responsible for the Balkans from Sirmium, and Constantius Chlorus governed Gaul and Britain from Trier. Now, how did this system impact the management of the vast imperial estates and the control of cities? With 4 emperors, each responsible for a specific part of the empire, it's likely that the administration of imperial lands within those regions became more localized. Each emperor would have had their own administrative staff and bureaucracy to oversee the imperial properties within their territory. Think of it as a large corporation decentralizing its operations, with regional managers taking responsibility for the assets in their area. This decentralization could have had both benefits and drawbacks. On the one hand, having an emperor, or at least his direct representative, residing in a particular region might have led to more efficient management of local imperial estates. They would have been more attuned to the specific needs and conditions of their territory and better able to respond to local issues. Imagine a regional manager having a better understanding of the local market than someone based in a distant head office. On the other hand, the division of the empire also meant that there was no single, overarching authority controlling all imperial lands. While Diocletian, as the senior Augustus, likely retained some level of overall authority, the practical management of estates and cities would have largely fallen to the individual emperors within their respective spheres of influence. This could have potentially led to inconsistencies in policy and administration across the empire. Imagine different regional branches of the same company operating with their own sets of rules and priorities. It's plausible that under the Tetrarchy, the concept of the emperor owning entire cities became even more directly linked to the specific emperor governing that region. While the ultimate authority still resided with the imperial college as a whole, the day-to-day control and administration of cities within a particular territory would have been the responsibility of the designated emperor. One mainstream historical fact about Diocletian is that he initiated a series of major reforms, including not only the Tetrarchy but also significant changes to the military, taxation and administration. His goal was to create a more robust and stable empire that could withstand the challenges of the 3rd century. The division of imperial responsibilities through the Tetrarchy was a key part of this reform effort. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Diocletian, after abdicating the throne in 305 AD, a voluntary retirement which was quite unusual for a Roman emperor, famously retired to his palace in Split, Croatia, and dedicated himself to growing cabbages. When Maximian later tried to persuade him to return to power during a period of renewed instability, Diocletian reportedly replied that he would rather enjoy his cabbages. Imagine an emperor saying, "No thanks, I'm busy with my vegetables." Historians still debate the long-term success of the Tetrarchy. While it did initially bring a period of relative stability after the chaos of the 3rd century, it ultimately broke down after Diocletian's abdication, leading to further civil wars among the competing emperors. This raises questions about whether the division of the empire, while intended to improve governance, ultimately sowed the seeds of future conflict. Under the Tetrarchy, it's likely that the management of imperial estates became more closely tied to the specific needs and priorities of each of the 4 imperial courts. Each emperor would have needed to generate revenue to support their administration, their armies, and their own building projects within their territory. This could have led to a more focused and potentially more efficient exploitation of the resources within each region. The division of the empire might also have led to the development of regional variations in how imperial lands were administered and how cities were governed. Each emperor might have adopted different approaches based on the specific conditions and traditions of their territory. Imagine different regions of the empire developing their own unique best practices for managing imperial properties. So Diocletian's Tetrarchy represented a radical experiment in imperial governance, driven by the need to manage a vast and increasingly complex empire. By dividing the empire among 4 emperors, he aimed to improve administration, enhance defence, and ensure a smoother succession. This system undoubtedly had a significant impact on how imperial estates were managed and how cities were controlled, moving towards a more decentralised model where regional emperors played a more direct role in overseeing the resources within their assigned territories. While the Tetrarchy ultimately proved to be a temporary solution to the empire's problems, it offers a fascinating glimpse into the evolving ways in which Roman emperors attempted to manage their vast and complex domain. We've just explored Diocletian's attempt to stabilise the empire through the Tetrarchy, a system of shared rule. However, this system, while initially effective, ultimately gave way to renewed conflict, out of which emerged a single dominant figure, Constantine the Great. His reign, beginning in the early 4th century AD, is a pivotal moment in Roman history, not least because of his decision to establish a new imperial capital in the east, Constantinople. And this act of founding a city from scratch, essentially moulding it to his will, provides a powerful example of the emperor as the ultimate city owner. Think of the situation Constantine faced. The Western Roman Empire was struggling, and the East, with its greater economic resources and strategic importance, seemed to offer a more promising future. Rome, while still carrying immense historical weight, was geographically somewhat isolated within the empire and no longer held the central strategic position it once did. Constantine, recognizing these shifts, made a bold decision to establish a new capital that would better serve the needs of the evolving empire. The location he chose was the ancient Greek city of Byzantium, situated on the European side of the Bosphorus Strait, a strategically vital waterway connecting the Black Sea with the Sea of Marmara and the Mediterranean. This location offered several key advantages. It was easily defensible, controlling both land and sea trade routes. It had access to the rich resources of the East, and it allowed Constantine to distance himself from the old Roman power structures and establish a capital more firmly under his personal control. Imagine choosing the perfect scenario to build a brand new corporate headquarters. You'd want it to be strategically located, easily accessible, and offer room for future growth. That's essentially what Constantine was doing on an imperial scale. In 324 AD, Constantine officially declared Byzantium as the new capital, and in 380 AD, the city was formally dedicated and renamed Constantinople, meaning City of Constantine. What followed was a massive building program aimed at transforming the relatively modest town of Byzantium into a magnificent imperial metropolis that would rival and eventually surpass even Rome in its grandeur and importance. Constantine personally oversaw the planning and development of his new capital. He laid out the city walls, defining its boundaries and ensuring its defensibility. He commissioned the construction of grand avenues, public squares, imperial palaces, administrative buildings, and churches. He even relocated important Roman institutions and families to Constantinople, effectively transferring the centre of imperial power to the east. Imagine being the architect and city planner all rolled into one, with the resources of an empire at your disposal. One of the most prominent features of the new city was the Hippodrome, a massive arena for chariot racing and other public spectacles, capable of holding tens of thousands of people. This was not just a place for entertainment. It was also a key venue for imperial ceremonies and a place where the emperor could directly interact with his people. Think of it as the ancient Roman equivalent of a major sports stadium and political rally venue combined. Constantine also invested heavily in the city's infrastructure, ensuring a reliable water supply through the construction of aqueducts and cisterns. He established public baths, markets, and other amenities to serve the growing population of the new capital. He was essentially creating a fully functioning city from the ground up, according to his own vision. This level of direct involvement in the planning and development of Constantinople meant that Constantine, in a very real sense, owned the city. It was his creation, built to his specifications, and directly under his control. He determined its layout, its key buildings, and its very name. While private land ownership would have certainly existed within the city walls, the overall direction and character of Constantinople were fundamentally shaped by the emperor's will. Imagine a company founder who not only owns the business, but also designed and built the entire headquarters from scratch. One mainstream historical fact about Constantine's founding of Constantinople is that it marked a major turning point in the history of the Roman Empire, shifting the focus of imperial power and culture to the east for over 1,000 years. Constantinople became the vibrant heart of the Byzantine Empire, a continuation of the Roman Empire in the east that would outlast its western counterpart by nearly a millennium. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. Legend has it that Constantine, while marking out the boundaries of his new city, walked for so long that his attendants dared to ask if he wouldn't go too far. Constantine reportedly replied, "I will go on until he who guides me stops." This speaks to the almost divinely inspired vision he had for his new capital. Imagine having such unwavering confidence in your city planning abilities. Historians still debate the precise motivations behind Constantine's decision to found Constantinople. While the strategic and economic advantages of the location are clear, some argue that his conversion to Christianity also played a significant role, as Constantinople offered a fresh start free from the pagan traditions that were deeply entrenched in Rome. The founding of Constantinople also had a significant impact on the balance of power within the empire. It created a new centre of authority that gradually eclipsed Rome in importance. This shift was not always smooth and led to tensions between the East and West, eventually contributing to the permanent division of the Roman Empire later in the 4th century. Constantine's direct control over Constantinople extended to its administration and its symbolic importance. He populated the city with citizens drawn from across the empire, bestowing privileges and incentives to encourage its growth. He adorned it with magnificent monuments, including the Column of Constantine, which featured a statue of himself dressed as the sun god, a fascinating blend of pagan and Christian symbolism. So in the case of Constantinople, we see the Roman emperor taking the concept of city ownership to its most literal form. Constantine didn't just own land within an existing city, he conceived, planned and built an entirely new metropolis, imbuing it with his own vision and ensuring its direct control by the imperial administration. It was a powerful demonstration of imperial authority and a move that would shape the course of Western civilization for centuries to come. This sets the stage for us to explore how this new imperial capital became the centre of a distinct Roman identity in the East and how the emperors of Constantinople continued to exert their ownership and control over this vital city. We've just witnessed Constantine's grand act of creating Constantinople, a city essentially born from the imperial will. But the story of emperors and their relationship with cities doesn't end there. The late Roman Empire, in both its Western and Eastern incarnations, continued to be shaped by the lasting impact of this imperial urban ownership. The emperors, whether ruling from Rome until its eventual decline in the West, or from the magnificent Constantinople, maintained a significant degree of control over the major urban centres within their vast domains. Think of the late Roman Empire as an ageing but still powerful entity. While the challenges it faced were numerous, barbarian migrations, internal divisions, economic woes, the legacy of centuries of centralized imperial rule, including the concept of the emperor as the ultimate arbiter of urban life, continued to exert a strong influence. In the Western Roman Empire of the 4th and 5th centuries, even as imperial authority waned and the empire eventually fragmented, the emperors, or those who claim the title, still held a theoretical and often practical sway over cities like Rome, Milan and Ravenna, which served as their capitals at different times. They appointed officials to govern these cities, oversaw public works when resources allowed, and often intervened in local disputes. Imagine a landlord who isn't always around, but still makes the important decisions and sends his representatives to collect the rent and make sure things are, mostly, in order. The Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantium, which flourished for over 1,000 years after the fall of the West, provides an even clearer picture of the lasting impact of imperial urban ownership. Constantinople remained the undisputed centre of the empire, and the Byzantine emperors exerted a profound level of control over its development, administration, and even the daily lives of its inhabitants. From the construction of magnificent churches like the Hagia Sophia to the regulation of trade and commerce within the city walls, the emperor's presence was palpable. Think of Constantinople as a company town on a grand scale, with the emperor as the ultimate CEO making all the major decisions. Throughout the late Roman Empire, imperial officials played a crucial role in maintaining the emperor's authority over cities. Prefects of the city, governors of provinces, and various other imperial appointees were responsible for enforcing laws, collecting taxes, overseeing public order, and ensuring the smooth functioning of urban life. These officials acted as the emperor's eyes and ears on the ground, extending his power and influence into the heart of the cities. Imagine a network of loyal managers and supervisors ensuring that the emperor's policies were implemented throughout his vast urban holdings. Interestingly, in the later stages of the Western Roman Empire, we also see the rise of powerful private landowners, often with close ties to the imperial court, who came to exercise significant control over towns and smaller cities located within their extensive estates. These individuals, sometimes referred to as magnates, could wield considerable local power, almost acting as mini-rulers in their own right. This could sometimes blur the lines between imperial ownership and private control, as these magnates might have their own armed retinues, collect taxes, and administer justice within their domains, sometimes with the implicit or explicit approval of the distant emperor. Think of it as a form of feudalism starting to take root, where powerful landlords held sway over their local areas. One mainstream historical fact about the late Roman Empire is the issuance of the Theodosian Code in the 5th century AD, a comprehensive collection of imperial laws that regulated various aspects of life, including urban administration and property ownership. This legal framework underscores the emperor's continued involvement in shaping the legal and social landscape of the cities within his empire. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In the Eastern Roman Empire, the emperors even had a direct hand in regulating aspects of city life that might seem mundane to us today, such as the prices of goods in the marketplace and the qualifications of various tradespeople. Imagine needing the emperor's permission to raise the price of bread in Constantinople. Talk about top-down management. Historians still debate the extent to which the increasing power of private magnates in the Western Roman Empire ultimately undermined imperial authority over cities. Some argue that these powerful landowners effectively carved out their own spheres of influence, weakening the central government, while others maintain that they often acted in concert with imperial interests, helping to maintain order in a difficult period. The lasting impact of the imperial urban ownership can be seen in the way that cities continue to function as centres of administration, commerce, and culture throughout the late Roman Empire. Even when faced with invasions and economic decline, the urban centres remained vital to the empire's survival, and the emperor's authority, however weakened in some areas, was still generally recognised as the ultimate source of legitimacy. In the Eastern Roman Empire, the legacy of imperial city ownership was even more enduring. Constantinople thrived for centuries as a powerful and influential metropolis, a testament to Constantine's vision and the continued commitment of his successors to its upkeep and development. The emperors of Byzantium saw the city as not just their capital, but as the very heart and soul of their empire. So the late Roman Empire, despite its challenges and eventual division, bears witness to the enduring impact of imperial urban ownership. Whether through direct administration by imperial officials in major capitals or through the influence, and sometimes control, exerted by powerful landowners in smaller urban centres, the emperor's presence and authority continued to shape the lives of city dwellers. This legacy was particularly strong in the East, where Constantinople stood as a lasting monument to the concept of the emperor as the ultimate city owner, a tradition that would continue for centuries to come. This brings us to our final section, where we'll briefly look beyond the Roman world to see echoes of this imperial influence. We've journeyed through the Roman world, witnessing the evolution of imperial land ownership, culminating in emperors who effectively owned vast tracts of land and even significant urban centres. But the idea of a ruler exerting profound control over cities is not unique to Rome. As we draw our sleepy-eyed exploration to a close, let's briefly consider some echoes of this phenomenon in later monarchical and imperial systems around the world. Think about the medieval period in Europe. Monarchs often had a special relationship with certain royal cities, which served as their primary residences and administrative centres. While they might not have owned every single building outright, their influence over these cities was immense. They granted charters, oversaw their governance, and often invested heavily in their infrastructure and defences. Imagine a king declaring, "This shall be my capital, and its fate is intimately tied to my own." Consider the absolute monarchies of the early modern era. Kings like Louis XIV of France took the idea of royal control over a capital city to an almost artistic level with the construction of Versailles. While technically just outside Paris, Versailles became the undeniable centre of French power, a meticulously planned city palace that served to showcase the king's absolute authority and control over his realm. It's like a CEO building a corporate campus so grand that it overshadows the entire surrounding area. Moving further east, the Ottoman sultans held absolute sway over their magnificent capital, Constantinople, after its fall to the Ottomans in 1453, renamed Istanbul. The Sultan controlled everything from the grand imperial palaces to the bustling marketplaces, his power radiating outwards from this central urban hub. Imagine a city where every aspect of life, from the call to prayer to the laws of commerce, was ultimately dictated by the ruler in the Topkapi Palace. Even in Asia we see similar patterns. The Chinese emperors held immense authority over their capital cities like Chang'an and later Beijing, which were meticulously planned and built to reflect the emperor's power and the celestial order he was believed to embody. The Forbidden City in Beijing is a stunning example of a ruler creating a self-contained urban complex that was the very heart of the empire. Think of it as a city within a city, entirely dedicated to the emperor and his court. Now, while these later examples share similarities with the Roman emperor's influence over cities, there are also some key differences. In many of these later cases, the legal framework of ownership might have been more clearly defined, with the monarch holding explicit title to significant properties and exercising clear legal authority over the city's governance. In the Roman context, as we've discussed, the lines between the emperor's personal property, public land managed by the emperor, and the autonomy of individual cities could sometimes be more fluid. However, the underlying motivations are often similar: the desire to project power and authority, to control key administrative and economic centres, and sometimes simply to create a magnificent urban environment that reflected the ruler's grandeur and vision. A capital city, especially one under the strong influence or even ownership of the ruler, served as a powerful symbol of their authority and the strength of their regime. One mainstream historical fact that highlights this trend is the concept of divine right of kings that developed in many monarchical systems, particularly in Europe. This ideology often linked the ruler's authority directly to God, reinforcing their right to rule and, by extension, their control over their territories, including capital cities. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some medieval European cities, the king's presence was so important that specific laws might be enacted detailing exactly how the city should behave when the monarch was in residence, down to the types of decorations that should be displayed and the level of noise that was permissible. Imagine having to check the royal schedule to know whether you could have a loud party. Historians still debate the long-term impact of this close relationship between rulers and their capital cities. While it could foster stability and promote cultural development, it could also lead to resentment and inequality if the ruler's interests were seen to be prioritised over the needs of the city's inhabitants. The concentration of power and resources in the capital could also sometimes lead to neglect of other regions within the realm. The echoes of imperial urban control can even be seen in some modern contexts, though the nature of that control has obviously evolved significantly. Governments still invest heavily in their capital cities, and the symbolic importance of the capital remains powerful. While direct ownership in the Roman sense is largely a thing of the past in most parts of the world, the influence of the state over its major urban centres is undeniable. So from the royal cities of medieval Europe to the imperial capitals of China and the Ottoman Empire, we see parallels with the Roman emperor's deep involvement in the ownership and control of cities. While the specific mechanisms and legal frameworks might have varied, the underlying desire of rulers to exert significant influence over their key urban centres remains a recurring theme throughout history. It speaks to the enduring importance of cities as centres of power, administration and culture, and the long-standing ambition of rulers to shape these vital spaces according to their will. Now, let's gently bring this journey to its close. We've explored the fascinating history of Roman emperors and their connection to land ownership, culminating in the idea of them essentially owning entire cities. From the early accumulation of estates to the grand vision of Constantinople, we've seen how power and property were intertwined in the Roman world. Think back to those grand villas, those bustling forums, those strategically located capitals. Imagine the sounds of Roman life, the clatter of chariot wheels, the murmur of conversations in Latin, the distant sounds of construction as another imperial project took shape. Feel the warmth of the Mediterranean sun on ancient stone, the cool breeze coming off the sea surrounding Capri, the sheer scale of Nero's golden house designed to impress and perhaps intimidate. As we drift towards the quiet of the night, remember that even the most powerful empires and the most ambitious rulers eventually fade into the tapestry of history. But the echoes of their actions in the form of ruins, stories, and the lasting impact on how we think about power and urban spaces continue to resonate through the centuries. Let your mind gently wander through these historical landscapes, these tales of emperors and their cities. Feel the weight of the past, but let it also soothe you into a state of calm. There's a certain comfort in knowing that even the grandest empires eventually find their rest in the long flow of time.